Hello and welcome to episode number 8 of This Bootstrapped Life. I am back in SF, which has been wonderful. Anyways, let's jump into it. I forgot to mention last week, I'm going to be hosting a Vision OS hackathon next month, September 13th to 15th. It's part of a global hackathon, Vision OS hackathon called Vision Hack. It's going to happen in multiple cities, or there are going to be meetups in multiple cities, including New York, SF, and so I'll be hosting the SF meetup. So there'll be a link in the description if you or anyone you know might be at all interested or it has any interest in Apple platform development. I think you'll enjoy it. We'll have extra devices on hand for people to use. So should be a good time. We have a great space, that kind of event, I think. Otherwise, it's been an interesting week for developers on Twitter. There's been a lot of commotion about Claude and Cursor and, to a lesser extent, v0.dev. And these are all great tools that, I, as a developer, use daily at this point. Whenever I want to create a new page or a new component or a new prototype for something, my default now is to just go reach for these tools. And, like the thought of creating something from scratch at this point just sounds terrible. which is funny. Now, when I started learning how to code, like in high school, it's like you wrote out every single div yourself and like wrote out, class equals whatever, and you had to like go and create a class in CSS and like line by line, like font dash size colon, is whatever px, like all that kind of stuff. Is just so funny to think about the kind of problems that you were learning how to solve like 10, 15, 20 years ago when you're learning how to code, and now how that's not a thing. Like if I want a new component, I can get like a pretty solid looking component like button or page or modal or whatever with like a sentence of English, and it gets you like 60% of the way there essentially, and then the last bit is you just prompting and getting more iterations on it, or just like looking at subsections of that code and prompting, let's say within Cursor there. What's cool though is that now on v0.dev, for example, kind of like Claude and Artifacts, you can just iterate in that like chat like interface and say, hey, like add this, hey, add this button here or add this modal there, and it'll go and iterate on the existing code base that it's creating for you. So that to me has been so wild. And what's cool is that you can publish a link to that whole chat and that code and stuff that, let's say, v0.dev creates for you. So now when I'm creating tasks on Linear or something, I actually often just go ahead and link to a v0.dev thread that I created with some initial version of what I had in mind, which is awesome. Like now you basically skip the whole Figma step for most purposes. Unless you need like a high fidelity thing, you can just iterate on like a solid live code product in such little time now. Which again, unless if you're a small indie, hacker company, whatever, like that's speed is the name of the game. It's not so much like having the perfect looking thing, So it's cool. It's really cool. It's lowering the barrier to entry significantly and lowering the cost to launch something for not only developers but also non-developers alike. It's wild to see people who've never coded go and jump into this stuff and create these these apps that do something right off the bat. So it does remind me that, because I am seeing some gatekeeping almost. And it reminds me of the gatekeeping that I saw when I was learning how to code, where back then I was like, oh, if you're writing like web job, browser-based code like HTML and JavaScript and CSS and whatever, like that's not coding. Like, you're just ripping off tutorials, or you're just like, it's just semantics or it's just whatever. And it's just funny because I think there's some version of that happening now to an extent. And I think part of it is that now it's like getting really existential, where it's like, oh, how do we justify our existence as developers, and our salaries and all these things, when you're starting to see people who've never coded create like full-on apps, either using no-code tools like Notion or Zapier or whatever, or like, essentially code tools, but code that they don't have to worry about understanding themselves perfectly line by line. They can just iterate on it with English. So it's great. We all win, to be honest. I think if you're a developer, you can still create wildly complex apps in a way that it took a lot longer before. And for everyone else, it still allows it just creates the option for you to create solid looking software without having to know how to do that yourself. Like before, if someone who didn't know how to code had to create software, if they got it to work at all, it would probably not look very good. It'd probably be just like super scrappy, like HTML and stuff, and like very plain looking buttons and things. But now, out of the box with these tools, you get like, let's say shadcn components from, let's say vue0.dev, and out of the box, it looks pretty good. It's like at least mid, and I think better than that, to be honest. So you get at least or around mid-level code and mid-level UI, UX with very far from mid-level experience with this stuff. So exciting times. And this reminds me, and what's interesting to me is how we still have GPT-4-ish level models from like the past year or so. And yeah, they are better undoubtedly. But it seems like the biggest thing that's happened is we've had a lot of unhobbling where we've unlocked these latent capabilities from these different models. And, unhobbling is, it involves things like chain of thought, where we realize that LLMs can better solve math and reasoning problems by having them plan out their steps and solve them in order like that. Much like a human, if I give you a math problem, x squared plus whatever equals y, you might have to go and pen and paper and write down a couple steps to get to what x equals. And so it makes sense that LLMs would maybe operate in a similar way. And so I think the current batch of tools that we're seeing come out are using similar level models, but seem to have much better outcomes. And I think it's due to a variety of these architectural improvements and these abstractions that we've realized allow us to unlock more latent capabilities. So really cool stuff. And I found that term unhobbling in this essay called Situational Awareness that came out this past summer. I had gotten busy and forgotten about it, and a friend mentioned it recently. And so I had a long flight and I had a chance to read it. And so I did. It's 150 pages, and it has a lot of good stuff in there. And it captures some thoughts that I've had about AI for a little bit around how, the trends are kind of crazy, particularly the trend lines around the current level, these levels of models we've seen over time. Like in a 4-year period, we went from GPT-2 preschool level to GPT-4 high school level, and the trend lines are similar before and after essentially. And it, due to 3 things: effective compute, more of that, better outputs, algorithmic efficiencies, number 2. So, better algorithms, better models, better outputs. And then number 3, unhobbling, where, you find out these patterns, these quirks, these techniques that allow us to eke out more performance from the same models by unlocking latent capabilities like chain of thought and that kind of stuff. So it's cool. And it paints the case for how in 4 years, plus or minus, we get to the point where, we have AGI, and particularly we're at the point where it does the work of AI engineers today. And that's the pathway to superintelligence, because at that point, it can iterate on itself 24/7 through 65. And very quickly after that point, you have superintelligence. So it is both cool and scary stuff, obviously, because there's a very real national security concern here. But anyways, I will not do justice in this video. I recommend checking out the PDF yourself. I'll link to it in the description, or using LLMs to summarize it for you if you just want to get a quick high-level view of what's going on. That essay goes into things like super alignment and how we might avoid superintelligence killing us all, for example. And it's mostly optimistic, and I think I've generally been optimistic as well about this stuff. So it's cool. Not to say that if I saw something that was not optimistic that I would disregard it. I'm not fixed on my position with AI, but it does just at least capture the overall feeling that I've had, at least seeing the trends over time these last few years, and how when I travel right now, I kind of get the sense like things are about to change so much in a way that we just can't even predict. It's like this feels like the moment right before smartphones, where just the before and after is just so difficult to compare. And I think we're like in 5 years, it's just going to be wild. So that's part of the reason why at times I've prioritized travel and other experiences over like making like a little more money. And part of why I generally don't believe in things like 401ks, to be honest, because I think that right now we cannot predict what the tax schemes of, a decade or 2 decades from now will look like. We have no idea, whether what countries will look like in 3, 4 decades. It's just there's so much that's in flux right now. It feels weird to like lock away money for the next, I don't know, like 40 years or something like that. Like, yeah, I feel like I might as well just enjoy life right now and take some other swings, like starting a company and things. So, anyways, maybe I'm just reckless, but I think I'm still pretty careful with my risk overall, and I will say that I am conservative with the cash that I do have and that I retain. Anyways, that's on the professional business side of things recently, where my thoughts have been. On the personal side, I was in Seattle last weekend. Saw my sister there. We went on a crazy long. It was like 15-kilometer hike, like in the rain, in classic Pacific Northwest fashion. But honestly, I loved it. It was a good test of my recent physical improvements because in SF you have a lot of hills as well, and I do a lot of walking here too. So I felt like I had just enough training to feel comfortable enough on that hike, but it was still a good challenge. Anyways, my heart is still, on the north in the Northwest, even though I'm on the West Coast now, which is cool. I do know that at some point I would like to move back to the Northwest. Anyways, right now, otherwise, I have no planned trips these next 3 months, which is for me a little bit liberating right now because as much as I love travel, I am embarking on what I'm calling chapter 2, where I'm ready to focus on the people that I've met already recently, the projects that I'm working on, and it follows this pattern of like explore versus exploit and knowing when to go down either path. When I first moved here, it was all about exploration. Who's doing what are the rhythms of the city, what is each corner of the city like, yeah, what's happening. And so after a few months of that, it's like, okay, well now let me kind of exploit, go down, go into depth. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now. These next few months is what I feel. And then of course after that point, then who knows? And I think part of it too is that I'd be going to events like recently, and I would start to feel like a broken record, almost like I'm LARPing, here, because I realized like, oh, while I'm making progress on some of these things, I'm not moving fast enough, and so I start to sound almost the same between events when I'm talking to people about what I'm doing and what I'm up to, and I don't like that. So I want to hunker down a little more right now and make some things happen, and then get back to doing the round, so to speak. And again, when I go to events, I don't do it in some transactional way. I really enjoy like meeting people, and it's actually a lot of fun. So I'm still going to go to events and meet people, obviously. But point being, I'm not going to prioritize that above all else for the moment. So that's just where I'm at personally. Anyways, thanks for watching this week's episode. I will see you next week, hopefully. Bye for now.